Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Explorers Club in this special evening focused on inspiring the next generation of girls and young women to pursue a life in field science and exploration with featured speakers Dr. Gabby Salazar and Dr. Clare Fieseler. Thank you to Natalie Cash and the Lectures Committee here at the club for making this event possible, and to Felix Freeland on the programming team as well. I should mention, because Sophia could not join us, that this event is done in part with Breaking Barriers, the Explorers Club's Women's Committee in celebration of Women's History Month. Breaking Barriers started for the 40th anniversary of women's membership in the club. We celebrated with women-focused events, programs, and a documentary film of the first 10 women members. Our goal is to use the club as a platform to continue to highlight women explorers, and their achievements. So my name is Rebecca Martin, and I'm a National Fellow of the Explorers Club since 2002. And I also serve as consulting director of two of the Explorers Club grant programs, the Exploration Fund grants and the Expedition grants. Prior to this, I spent many years launching and directing some of the pivotal grant programs at National Geographic. One of those programs was the Young Explorer Grants, which I launched in 2006. With a 100-year history of grant making at National Geographic, some wondered what ideas could possibly come in from the next generation that would stand up to the likes of the Society's regular roster of more senior grantees, individuals already advanced in their careers. Well, if I think back, Jane Goodall received her very first grant from National Geographic in her early 20s when she, as she notes, when she told me that nobody else would fund her because she said they thought I was crazy. They thought her chimpanzee research was just, not aligned with prior studies. So the Society took a risk, and the rest was history. 31 grants later in Jane's case, and she's a global conservation icon. And she's someone who had a female mentor at National Geographic by the name of Mary Smith, who took Jane under her wing and took a risk on investing in her. Talk about a return on investment. And that's what we quickly witnessed with the Young Explorer grant program. You give a young individual with a good idea, a little support, $5,000 maximum for this program, and they become actually Gabby Salazar and Clare Fieseler, the two brilliant and, yes, still young, at least from my perspective, women from whom you'll hear this evening. I am immensely proud of everything they've achieved since their Young Explorer grant. Nearly 15 years ago, and I'm also very proud and honored to call them my friends. So what I witnessed in the Young Explorer program is, number one, if you build it, they will come. Within a couple years, we had by far the most diverse and international grant program in the National Geographic Society, and we had gender parity through no special effort. In fact, we had more female grantees than male grantees. And they were all brilliant, utterly brilliant. And a number of those past female young explorers are featured in the book that's on sale outside. And that makes me very, very proud. Fast forward to today, there is an extraordinary network of women explorers from this program who have recently received their PhDs and who are powerful storytellers like Clare and Gabby, and who are changing the world for the better. In fact, through working on this program and with so many talented and committed young individuals, many of them women, it really wasn't long before I felt an overwhelming sense of hope for the future of the planet. They're super bright, deeply committed, and they've got this. So providing role models for inspiration and even mentoring, as well as the tools and support to follow one's dream, are indeed the keys to success in the making of an explorer. And this is what our presenters this evening have so deftly pulled together in this beautiful book. Thank you for joining us for this Women's History Month presentation at the Explorers Club, and please give a warm welcome to Clare Fieseler and Gabby Salazar.
My name's Clare Fieseler, and I co-wrote this book with Gabby Salazar. So it's on sale outside. But this night is so much more than just this book. And before I begin, I just really want to thank Rebecca Martin, who invited us here tonight, but also who launched our careers when we were just 24 and 27 years old and took a shot on us. So thank you so much, Rebecca. So the reason why I'm so happy to be here is because it is Women's History Month. So let's give a round of applause for that. And that the Explorers Club, a club that was not always open to women, nor their history, has really dedicated this month to highlighting women. And we're in this historic building with this historic organization. But through my work over the past decade, I've really come to see history as not only looking back, but also looking around and looking to the future. And I'm going to tell you why that is in just a moment here. But first, a little bit about me. So maybe it's not advancing. Oh, sorry. There we go. So my story starts in 2011 when I got my very first National Geographic Young Explorers grant. I was just starting my PhD, and I was researching coral reefs and climate change all around the world. I was in Belize, Panama, and the far reaches of the Pacific Ocean, where these photos were taken. I received my first National Geographic grant in 2011, and then another in 2015. And I was thrilled to be doing this work. I had kind of, spent my life working towards this, growing up on the Jersey Shore, not too far from here, and falling in love with the ocean there. And I was really proud to be a National Geographic Young Explorer. But I must say that early on, I dreamed of being in the magazine. I thought my work would one day be featured. But as I spent more time in the organization, I realized that not only were women not being featured, but it was mostly a lot of men, white men. It wasn't until 2014 where I picked up a dusty issue of National Geographic that had been sitting on my bedside table that this really hit me. It was a special issue about reviving extinct species, a very sciencey issue, and I picked it up, and on the inside, what they call front matter, it had not just the names, but the pictures of all the experts and scientists and grantees they were highlighting in this issue. Every single one was a man, except for one woman. And it really hit me. And I picked up a pen, and I picked up a pad of Post-its, and I just read every single word in this issue. And I counted how many men versus how many women were cited in this. And as you'll see, there were only 4 female scientists versus 33 men. So this is a representation of 10% women scientists on this very important topic, right? And the main story, the main feature of this, there's only one woman cited, and guess what? She was the wife of one of the scientists. And so I thought, maybe this is just an egregious example of a problem. So I mentioned this to other young explorers I had met at the society. And I said, let's go through a lot of issues, right? So about a group of about 8 of us, including Gabby Salazar, we went through issues from October 2012 to July 2015, and we read every single word. We categorized the theme of the articles. We tried to identify the gender of every single person cited, quoted, put in a photograph. And we found that over 36 issues, women were only represented 19% of the time. And for articles about science, that dropped down to 17%. So, this was clearly an issue at National Geographic. But was this just an issue here? I actually reached out. I mentioned this to a friend of mine who was a reporter at NPR at the time. And NPR was ahead of its time. They had just established a diversity, equity, and inclusion department within the organization that had done its own very similar internal study, right? So mine was very informal, theirs was formal, and they found that the numbers were somewhat better, but not by much. So in NPR, they don't just do science, they do obviously everything, and women were represented about 22% of the time. So National Geographic kind of, had a lot of work to do, but so did everything else. So did everyone else. But I want to just say one thing. It was not just the numbers. How women were described was also something that was shocking to me. In just 2 examples I want to mention, women were always described by how they appeared. In a 2012 magazine issue, just here's what it said about the lead scientist. With her silver curls, girlish voice, and diminutive 5'0" frame, Patricia Sutherland seems an unlikely expedition leader. And then the one I could not get over and still can't get over, Jane Goodall, science icon of our time. The article they wrote on her 70th birthday, on April 3rd, 2014, 80th, Jane Goodall turned 80. The iconic blonde ponytail has gone gray. Like, that was the most important thing about this milestone, right? So, we had a lot of work to do. And so, young, 29-year-old me marched into National Geographic and said, look what I found. And I gotta say, Rebecca gave me a platform to talk about this within the organization. And we put together a whole presentation, and eventually the editor-in-chief of National Geographic asked me to present to all the top editors, which was very intimidating as a young person. And they all nodded, and they all said thank you, and they all said we're gonna do better, and they said thank you for your time. Goodbye. And while I was grateful for the opportunity to communicate this, I left angry. And angry can be a very big motivator, I found. But what was I gonna do? I wasn't a magazine editor. I wasn't a magazine writer. I was not even a photographer, right? But I thought, how hard can it be? So I wrote a grant I was a graduate student at the time at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I wrote a grant to explore women scientist representation within the state. We're talking very small. I got $1,000, so I took a road trip. And I ran across the state, and I met women. This is a nanoscientist who also is one of the world's best mountain bikers. And this is the white lab coat she wears in her work. And she wanted to pose, training, showing both of her identities. And this was the first story, this is the first photograph, first photo project I ever did. I just fell in love with trying to represent women in this way. I also went down to the swamps of North Carolina. I met women who worked for the federal government who were waist deep in water. I got stung by multiple wasps when I was out working with them, doing work that no male scientist wanted to do, they were doing. And I also saw, women scientists who were speaking out, especially women, Black and brown scientists who wanted to have a voice. This is the founder of the Black in STEM movement, and she posed for me as well. And someone at National Geographic got wind of, little old me driving around, having a road trip in North Carolina, and they made a short film about me, a little short video of me that was on the National Geographic website. And they interviewed me, and I just started talking about all the things I had been researching because I was so angry. And one of the things I said was, girls cite the lack of role models as a reason not to enter STEM. And another thing is that girls will feel a sense of belonging if they feel like they can relate to those role models. So for me, in this small little photo project, a project that I had no prior experience, doing as a photographer, showing counter stereotypes or trying to go against those stereotypes was very important to me. And what I found out is that this little video went across the internet, was reposted. I got so many emails like, hey, you should fly to Australia and document this person. You should fly to Asia and document this person. And I also was invited to talk. People are really hungry for this message. I spoke at multiple high schools across the University of across North Carolina, and there was a traveling exhibit at different high schools as well after the end of my project. And then in 2015, I was invited in the front row. There's Rebecca and Gabby's in there too in the red. I was invited to come to the National Geographic Society headquarters for a meetup of these other young explorers. And I met Gabby Salazar. And I gotta say, I was very intimidated. Because I was a science, graduate student. And she had been, at that point, taking photos for 10 years. In fact, prior to meeting her, I had just seen a photo of hers exhibited in the Museum of Natural History for winning an award when she was 15 for her work. And that's that little bee photo at the bottom there. Not only that, is that she had spent years already engaging young people in this. This is a photo of, what country is this? Mauritius, of her engaging young people with a photo project she had done in Mauritius. So she had been doing this for years, and I was just flying by the seat of my pants, right? And so after I had presented on my photo project, and Gabby came up to me afterwards, and she said, I think this is a global story. I think we should go outside of North Carolina. And she's from North Carolina, born and raised. And, with, her being a photographer, with her experience in both of these areas, I said, let's go. So the first idea we had is that let's make a short film. Now, I had a background in film production, but I had never directed a short film. Gabby had never directed a short film, but we thought, how hard could this be? So we ended up getting, thanks to support from Rebecca Martin and other program officers at National Geographic, they gave us a small grant to do a proof of concept. And so we flew to Zimbabwe, and we made a short film about a female scientist struggling with a lot of different gender barriers to do her work on some of the world's most famous lions. And it's about 10 minutes, and I'm going to show it to you now. Can we lower the lights? Yeah.
Some of the small things that I love about Hwange is just the sunrise. It's beautiful. The birds, the wildlife. Yeah, I love being in the bush. I love wildlife conservation. In the Zimbabwe society, it's difficult for a woman to be away from their family.
There's a pride, there's a big pride, although it's separate sometimes, but sometimes they are like 26 when they come together. So it's a huge pride. And hopefully we might see some lions there.
The first time I saw a lion in the wild, it was extraordinary. The last time I saw Cecil the lion was in 2015. I knew Cecil very well because he was one of my study lions. He had a collar and we were tracking him, and I was collecting data on him with the cubs. I didn't expect that to be the last time that I would see him. But yeah, it was the last time that I saw him.
Tonight, the hunt is on for the man who killed Cecil, a 13-year-old lion and tourist attraction in Zimbabwe's safari industry.
Cecil was perhaps Zimbabwe's most famous lion. The majestic male, 13 years old, with a famous black mane, has been killed by hunters.
I think it's important to have some good come out of this disgusting tragedy. So this is the website for the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at Oxford, wildcru.org. These are the researchers who put the collar on Cecil in the first place. They tracked the
It opened many people's eyes to lion conservation issues, and it also helped me to cover my 4th year of PhD at Oxford University. I was at home in Kimberley when I heard that Cecil was shot.
They say the lion was lured out of National Park.
I live in Kimberley because my family is there. It's a small town in the Northern Cape in South Africa. It's complicated because I live in 3 countries. I'm living in Kimberley at the moment with my family, but I'm also studying in Oxford in the UK. And I also spend some time in the field in Hwange National Park where I'm studying lions. I have to find a balance between my work in Hwange National Park and my son. It has been a process for him to understand. When he was little, it was difficult for him every time I went away, but as he grew older, he's now more understanding of the situation. The bus ride from Kimberley, South Africa to Hwange National Park is a very long ride. It takes more than 36 hours. I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and get to the bus. The bus will take me to Johannesburg in South Africa. In Johannesburg, it frightens me to be there, and it's not safe. So I change buses and take another bus that would leave me in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. And at the border, it might take hours for the bus to be processed and for us to be processed. The bus from Bulawayo to Hwange is unpredictable. Sometimes it's late and it's not a luxury coach, so it's not comfortable at all. And sometimes it's packed.
Very tired after spending.
Okay, thank you for coming. Yeah, maybe they got carried away.
Yeah, nothing much. Same.
There, Mr. Loan. Stop, Mr. Loan. To our left. Underneath that tree.
It's always exciting to see the lions. It always feels like the first time. So I'm always excited when I see the lions.
Oh yeah, I can see it. There.
In order for us to come up with conservation measures, we have to understand how a species behaves. So we record how many individuals there are, their sex, their age, and whether they belong to that pride or they are new individuals.
There were 4 females. There were 3 adult females.
Some of the data that I'm collecting is the prey abundance data.
You can tell me to stop. You can tell me to stop when you see something.
All right, yeah, fine.
Okay. I'll be driving and recording. The one who's our tracker would be sitting in front of the vehicle on a specialized seat, counting all the animal tracks he sees.
Sixteen impala, one zebra.
One zebra.
We collect data on all the animal species that we find. Yeah, the research is risky because we do a lot of walking. Even like when you're driving, there's always a risk of encountering like elephants, even lions and buffaloes. So it's always risky. All the people I work with are wonderful. Sometimes it's difficult to be the only woman among all the men, but they treat me as an equal and they respect me as a person, and I think that's why we work together very well. It would be easier to go and work in another country and be a scientist somewhere else. It's so difficult to survive in Zimbabwe. The economy is collapsing, and so it's really difficult to get by. But I would want to stay in Zimbabwe and help build Zimbabwe because the future will be brighter. It's all worth it. There are things both of the things that I love. I love my son and I love my job.
Have you thought about giving up?
Yeah, there are moments when I have thought about giving up. It's hard being a woman in science. Society doesn't treat women the same way they treat men. It's not acceptable for me to be away or to travel a lot. But for a man to do the same thing, it's acceptable. But it's something that I love, and so I have to find a way to move forward.
So I hope you enjoyed our film, our first film, and our first attempt at filmmaking. And I would like to say that Marangels continues to do incredibly well. She's started her own organization focused on conservation. She finished her PhD. I think she just got back from a research expedition in Antarctica. I mean, she's just doing amazing work. And Claire and I went on to, premiere the film at National Geographic's Further Film Festival, and the film did very well in festivals around the country, and we were thrilled with the reception. And we had a whole series planned. We had identified another 9 women from around the world with incredible stories of the barriers that they had faced and overcome in their journeys into careers in science and exploration. Unfortunately, we didn't get funding for that series. And we were really disappointed at first. We had put a lot of heart and time into creating a pitch and gathering those stories. And we sat with that rejection for a while. And after a few months, I was reflecting on my work in engaging youth and in youth education. And I started thinking about the audience for this project. And I came to Claire and I said, I don't think that the audience really should be adults at film festivals. I think the audience should probably be young people. And so I asked Claire if she would be up for repackaging this project and this idea into a kid's book. And so that began a very big process. And since Claire and I are both scientists, we started planning the book by delving into the research on science identity, on career trajectories, and on perceptions of scientists. And so we went into the literature on how kids perceive scientists. And we learned that kids have a lot of existing stereotypes about what a scientist looks like, and that can influence whether they see themselves as scientists. So this picture is from something called the Draw a Scientist test, and it was developed in the 1980s. And basically, researchers asked kids to draw a scientist. And they found that kids largely drew white men in lab coats. And you might say, well, that was the 1980s, it's 2024, surely things have changed. But we found a systematic review of 30 studies using the Draw a Scientist test from, I think, 2003 to 2018, and the results are largely unchanged. So that's the bad news. The good news is that we also found a lot of research on solutions and opportunities to change perceptions. So one of the first reviews that we found said that, counter-stereotypical role models, like Claire mentioned, really can influence women's decisions to pursue careers in fields where they're underrepresented or negatively stereotyped, like STEM fields. So we knew we wanted our book to overcome stereotypes by highlighting scientists from around the world with diverse backgrounds. We also found a lot of research that showed that girls do cite a lack of female role models as a key reason they do not pursue careers in STEM. And that exposure to these female role models, as Claire mentioned, can increase girls' sense of fit, their feelings of belonging in science, and their confidence to pursue science. So we wanted our book to provide relatable and authentic female role models by highlighting women who are working in STEM fields and exploration today, not just women from history. And third, we also found a lot of research showing that girls may have a really limited perception of what counts as science. Media representations tend to highlight a really limited number of STEM-related careers. Most people in the media are physicians or surgeons. And so we wanted our book to expose readers to a really wide range of careers related to science and exploration. So we took all of this research and we put it into a pitch, and we pitched our ideas to National Geographic Kids Books. And luckily, they said yes. And so about 3 years later, through the pandemic, through all kinds of things, we came out with No Boundaries, our book, 25 women explorers and scientists share adventures, inspiration, and advice. And the target kind of age range for this book is about 9 to 14, but we found that younger kids enjoy it, and we've also found that adults enjoy it too. And the book features 25 women, including some EC50 grantees or awardees like Danielle Lee. And we really tried to pick women who had stories representing all kinds of different pathways into exploration and really trying to find women who represented different career paths and different age ranges, really diversity in all kinds of different levels. And I just wanted to read a small excerpt from Danielle's profile, just to give you an idea of kind of what we were going for in the book. And Danielle is a mammologist and an outreach scientist. And so this is from her profile. To my professors in college, my teachers in high school, I was always asking, why? Danielle says. Up until then, I thought the answers came from somewhere or someone else. But it was then that I realized I could answer my own questions. It was a light bulb moment for Danielle. She didn't have to be a veterinarian to work with animals. She could be a scientist, or more specifically, a mammologist. She says she realized then and there, this is what I want to do. Becoming a scientist wasn't something Danielle had ever considered before, perhaps because she hadn't seen scientists who looked like her when she was a kid. When she thought of a scientist as she was growing up, she'd pictured a white man. While there are more women and people of color in the field today, Danielle still deals with many people who have a specific idea of what a scientist looks like. Even when someone knows a scientist will be coming by, I'll show up and they'll say, we're waiting on a scientist, she says. And I say, that's me. I'm the scientist. Even today, we still have to educate people that scientists come in different packages. And so we're really grateful to National Geographic for Kids Books, for letting us delve into some of these tougher topics for kids. And we've gotten a lot of positive responses about Danielle's story in particular. We also got to highlight women like Asha DeVos, who is a Sri Lankan marine biologist. Her story is really incredible and one of my favorites because it really shows the power of persistence, which we'll talk about as a big theme in the book. And I'll just read one more excerpt just because I love this story so much. It's when Asha got her first opportunity to study whales in Sri Lanka. So basically, where we are in the story is a research vessel has come to Sri Lanka and Asha wants to be on it. Asha couldn't believe it. A research vessel studying whales so close to her home, her mind filled with possibilities. She wanted to be on that ship more than anything, but how could she make that happen? This was before smartphones and the internet were everywhere. But she was determined to get a message to the owner of the boat. So she gathered up what little money she had and headed to the nearest internet cafe. I'd like to get on board, she wrote him, and I'm the only Sri Lankan who's ever wanted to do this. The next day, she went back to the cafe to see if he'd written back. He had. Asha was so excited, she opened the email and read, "Thank you for contacting us. We don't have an opportunity for you." Asha felt defeated, but she didn't give up. She went back to the cafe the next day and the next and the next. I wrote to the owner every day for 3 months, she says. She told him more about herself and about her interests and aspirations. She told him she just wanted to learn more about whale research and how it's done. Her persistence paid off. The boat's owner said she could join them on board for 2 weeks if she was able to get to the Maldives in 1 day. Asha quickly packed her things and hopped on the next available flight. I turned up there 24 hours later, Asha remembers. I think I shocked everyone. Asha was hired as a deckhand. I was cleaning toilets and polishing brass, she says, but that didn't bother me because once I got there, I knew I could prove to them I could do the science too. So we really wanted to highlight stories that really show young people that it's not always easy. We all know in this room, right? It's not always easy. There are bumps, there are barriers, but that persistence pays off. We also wanted to highlight women who don't have typical academic pathways into science and exploration, who contribute to science and exploration with their athleticism or other talents that they have. So an example of this is Mallory Dimmitt, is an amazing expedition leader. She works in Florida on the Florida Wildlife Corridor and has led expeditions 1,000 miles across the state of Florida by foot and canoe, trying to raise awareness about conservation issues in the state of Florida. And so in total, we were able to highlight these 25 women after doing these long-form interviews with them to understand their stories, and to also provide this yearbook kind of different opportunities and pathways and possibilities for young people who may never have been exposed to these career paths. Because again and again in the interviews we did with the 25 women, we heard things like, I never knew I could be a volcanologist until someone came to talk to my class. Or I never knew I could be a geologist until I read a book at the library. So we wanted to help accelerate that process by getting those words and those possibilities into kids' minds a lot earlier. We were very happy with the reception that the book had. We were awarded by the National Science Teaching Association one of the best STEM books of 2023. But for Claire and me, I think some of the best reviews came from kids and their families. And so this is actually Claire with her daughter Remy, who was basically at all of the interviews. She was breastfeeding at the time, or she was Claire was pregnant with Remy, and we did these wonderful Zoom interviews with these women, and Remy would be there being adorable. And we also had this great quote from one of Claire's friends. She wrote to us, and the friend's daughter, Kelly's daughter, is over here on the right. My daughter just came down from her room and told me she wants to be a bioengineer. I don't even know what that is. And so we love that these stories are helping expose kids to these just totally different possibilities for their lives. One of the things that we talked about when we finished the book was that it was great to have a book, but the book isn't accessible to every kid that needs to hear this, right? It does go into libraries. National Geographic Kids Books is great about putting books in school libraries. But some of the women in the book wanted to share it with all of their friends in Nepal or their friends in, Zimbabwe. More Angels wanted it in every school in Zimbabwe, and we just didn't have the ability to get the books out there. And we were thinking about what we had on hand, and we had all of these audio recordings from the interviews we'd done with the women. And so we decided to pitch a podcast to National Geographic Kids that would tell some of these stories in an audio format and be freely available to anyone that has access to the internet. And so I'll just play you a little trailer from the podcast. And my co-host for this, Claire helped produce. My co-host for the podcast was Munaza Alam, who is also just recently an EC50 awardee, and she works in astrophysics, an amazing woman. And here's the trailer. And she's featured in the book. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Have you ever wondered what it's like digging for ancient artifacts or looking for planets outside our solar system?
Well, in the Nat Geo Kids How We Explore podcast, 2 National Geographic explorers talk to scientists and explorers from around the world and hear about the things that matter, like how did you become an explorer?
What did you do all day?
What challenges do you face in the field?
We hear about erupting volcanoes,
swimming with manatees,
and bugs. Lots of bugs.
And hearing all these amazing stories, we wanted to share them with you
and show you how we explore. The How We Explore podcast launches June 10th.
So this was a really fun project, and we really enjoyed putting this together. And as Claire and I think we're never done working, right? We're always like, oh, we could do this. And so as Claire and I were listening to these audio interviews we had on hand for the podcast, we really realized that there were a lot of messages in those interviews that just weren't right for the 10 to 14-year-old audience, but they were such important pieces of wisdom that would resonate with adults or with particularly young people, like college-age students who are thinking about what they want to study or what they want to do next in their career. And so we actually, with the help of Lenovo EDU and Meridian Treehouse, we were able to put together an 8-part video series aimed at university students with new interviews with 8 women from the book. And this really gets into advice about how do you become a linguistic anthropologist? What does that mean? Or we have Annie Griffiths, who's a photographer with National Geographic, who talks about her career with us. And so that's also available for free online on YouTube or on Lenovo EDU. And we hope it's being used in classrooms. And so, looking back on this project, it's been incredible. It started with a conversation really at a National Geographic headquarters Young Explorers meetup. And it's turned into this whole suite of storytelling products that I couldn't have done on my own without a wonderful collaborator, which I think is a real key to making these types of projects happen. And I'll let you, Claire, tell you a little bit more about what we learned in the process.
So we've gone around and talked about this. Oops, sorry. We've talked about this storytelling journey quite a bit, and we always kind of get the same question, which is like, how can I as an individual, or how can we as an organization encourage young people to enter into these fields, to change the system so that we have gender parity in National Geographic magazine? And so there's kind of 3 themes that really have risen to the surface over the 8 or 9 years that we've been involved in this. And for me, the most important is perseverance. Perseverance is really vital. Skills are always being honed, knowledge is always being learned, but we found that the women who stuck with it, who wouldn't give up, who would get back up after falling down, were the ones that were most successful. And so if you are mentoring someone or you are in the position to mentor others, stressing perseverance above natural talent or the extra degree, we found is just as important. And for me, it's the thing that I tell young people the most, is to really stick with it. Because you don't always have to be the smartest person in the room, but you have to be the most persistent.
And I think along with that and related is that we found that failure is common and it's okay. And, we asked every woman we interviewed for the book, have you ever had a big failure and can you tell us about it? And every single one of them laughed and then told us at least one failure story, if not multiple stories. And I think, if you are mentoring or talking with young people or as a club, I think, normalizing failure, being really open about it and talking about how we can learn from it instead of being, shut down by it is really, really important. And then mentorship is the third part. As Claire mentioned, we've had a wonderful mentor in Rebecca. We have also, I think, mentored each other, right? Yes. Mentorship can be horizontal or vertical. It can be formal or informal. But mentors played such a huge role in the lives of all of the women that we interviewed. And so I encourage all of you, even if you don't think you have something to give, you can mentor, right? And we can all give advice and we can all give support to each other. And so, reflecting on this whole process, starting back with the film and now through the book and the podcast, when we first started this, the project was pretty unique, right? We started this and we did it because we thought it was a really important thing that needed to exist. But luckily, since starting the project, lots of media initiatives have come out about women in science. Lots of organizations, including the Explorers Club, are doing a lot more to elevate stories of women in science, National Geographic included. And we are just thrilled that our project is no longer as unique. And so, thank you so much. And we're happy to take some questions.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Claire and Gabby. I'm endlessly proud of everything you're doing and the important work in terms of showcasing all these amazing women explorers. And I do want to make a comment about mentorship, is that, in a really good mentoring relationship, it's a two-way street. So they have mentored me while I have mentored them. And I'm really grateful for everything I've learned from you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question. You carefully conducted this survey of women in National Geographic, how scientists are featured in Nat Geo a decade ago.
Right.
And so have you gone back or Or do you notice more women featured in the magazines, or significantly more women, from the time you first made your presentation, did that survey, and then made the presentation?
Yes and no. So yes, in that there's definitely an awareness at National Geographic now, and actually I was contacted a couple years later by Cheryl Zook.
Mm-hmm.
They replicated my survey of kind of more recent issues to provide this in a more formal way, and so that was great. Something that just kind of started like in a fit of anger in my bedroom has become more formalized within the society, I believe. And so I see it more, but it's nowhere close to 50-50. We still have a long way to go. And I also think that there's another part of this. It's that that's like the new thing to tackle. So we're highlighting women, but are we also letting women writers write the story and women photographers shoot the photographs? And so that's also, another thing that I didn't even look at the time. So we're getting better, but we have a long way to go. So.
Yeah, I will say though, Jen Guyton just had the cover story with hyenas of the latest National Geographic magazine. So check it out. Another young explorer. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
So that's exciting. We should open it up to the floor. Do we have questions from any of the young explorers in the audience, or slightly older explorers?
Hi, thank you so much. Obviously representation is really important for women and girls in STEM, but so is access to education, whether that's elementary education all the way up through, college and early career. And I'm curious if there's any initiatives that you've been involved in or any movements that you've seen to support early STEM education for young people as well, specifically young women.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm actually on the board of an organization called Conservation Nation that is dedicated to increasing diversity in conservation in particular. And they're doing a lot of great work with an initiative called Conservation Nation Academy in schools and right now in the Washington, D.C. area, but they're hoping to expand that. And it really is about early education, early STEM education and access. And they're working a lot in schools that don't usually have access to these extracurricular programs. So I think that's just one example. We're seeing other examples come up, but certainly needs to be expanded. And I agree that access is absolutely critical.
More questions? In the back there, if you can stand up too.
Check. I was curious, so this started with a short film. This journey that you all went on, and you seem to have created a lot of great content out of that initial idea of making a short film and presenting a series to Nat Geo, which ultimately they decided not to pursue. So 2 parts. 1, why do you think they chose not to pursue that series? And 2, given the success of the content that you've had subsequently, have you pitched the idea again to Nat Geo, or is there any interest in trying to get them to pick up the series now?
Well, we were told, okay, so when we pitched the idea, web series were really hot. It was like the hot thing. And that's no longer a hot thing. And I think National Geographic just got out of that game. The producer that we had been talking with actually left. They were going to do short social videos, and then they were going to do like the long form stuff, right? So that middle area that we had pitched in, they were no longer doing that. It was just an unfortunate timing. And then a couple, I think a year later, the National Geographic did the Year of the Women, and they did a bunch of books and magazine features about women, and so it wasn't focused just on women scientists, but there was a big focus on women in general. And so that was big. Have we gone back and approached National Geographic about doing something? We should. Yeah, I think the story, I think if Gabby and I, were to do that, we would really have to think about, what we want to focus on. Like, is it about representation? Is about like the way women are, the way we describe them? Like, we really need to focus on the story. And that would take some time, but it's not, we haven't approached them is the answer, but it's a good idea. We have another Nadir project in the works, but that's to be discussed later.
Question here? Yes. The microphone's coming to you.
Hi, we're visiting from New Mexico. I have my daughter here, AP, who is the regional science fair champion in 6th grade. Now, as a father, I'm watching the two of you, and I'm thinking to myself, thank God, my daughter, who is obviously a brilliant scientific mind, doesn't have the representation problem anymore because she gets to watch you. Do you think that's true? Or are we just, the small privileged group that gets to sit here with you at the Explorers Club, and what can we do to improve that around the country and the world?
That's a great question, and congratulations. I think that there are a lot of opportunities to hear stories like this one, but parents have to probably seek them out. We still hear from teachers. So one of the original reasons I didn't mention that I wanted to do a kids book is I had actually spoken at a National Science Teachers Association conference, and the teachers came to me and said, we really need examples of women scientists working today. Like, the only women scientists that show up in our book are from history, and they're from like 100, 150 years ago. And, it's Marie Curie, who's amazing, don't get me wrong, but like, that's the example. And so I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of the actual curriculum that gets into schools. And so in terms of broader, media, not just something that a motivated and concerned parent who's really supportive goes to the library and seeks out those resources. I think that for kids every day in the classroom, there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that textbooks and general educational materials reflect the diversity of women explorers. So yeah, that's something I think that we could definitely work on.
Just one more thing. Thank you. I do think, the reason why I went into science is that I had a one-on-one experience with a hero of mine. Her name is on a plaque right there. Her name is Sylvia Earle. She's a Explorer Club member. She's also from New Jersey, also was inspired by her time at the Jersey Shore to go into science. And I was starting a career in filmmaking early on, and I had the opportunity to do a lifetime achievement reel about her. And I got the opportunity to meet her, and she was like, why don't you just go into science? What are you doing with this film stuff, And, in the end, I did both, but, she inspired me. I really had that one-on-one, discussion, looking a scientist in the eye. And I think that's really important. So I try to get around. I try to meet as many kids as possible. It's not always, there are only so many female scientists to go around. There's a great organization called Explore by the Seat of Your Pants, where classrooms can request a scientist to essentially Zoom in for free, right? And if you have a kid or you have a grandkid, you can suggest it to the teacher just to get that like one-on-one experience. It's really key, at least for me, and I know for others, like you said. Meeting and seeing in person, or even through a screen, makes a difference.
Question. We'll see. You have two questions there. We can do one after the other.
Just wanted to add that Wings World Quest, which is a
yes, Wings World Quest.
Wings has sent scientists out to the different schools through their educational program, and the Society of Women Geographers supports some 25 graduate fellowships every year for women scientists. So there are a lot of things that are going on, not nearly enough, but every time you've got a teacher in a school who mentions something. I was lucky enough to be sitting in my office a couple of years ago, and I heard the third grade science teacher next door to me talking about the sperm whales coming through the Azores, and I went to stand in the doorway of the room, and she looked at me and said, "Do you have a question?" And I said, "Well, no, but I swam with the sperm whales in the Azores, and I wanted to hear what you had to say." And she said, "Would you come in and talk to the kids?" So you never know who's around who may be able to walk in and talk. And so that's an important thing, too.
Question right next.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking. We heard a little bit, Claire, about how you fell into this path. And I'm curious, Gabby, your first picture was taken when you were 15. I was wondering what that moment was for you that you knew you were going to pursue this career.
Oh, great question. Thank you for asking. Well, my dad was actually an amateur photographer, and he got me into photography when I was 11. So he took me out to a friend's backyard bird garden and showed me a blue jay through a borrowed lens in a backyard in North Carolina, and I was totally hooked on photography. But I think for me, a big turning point was actually when I won the award that Claire mentioned, and I got to travel to Washington, D.C. and see my image on this museum wall, but not just see the image there, but watch people interacting with the image and with the other images in the exhibit. And for me, that was a really big moment because I saw kind of the power of photography to communicate about nature and to get people interested. And after that, I kind of got into conservation photojournalism and started telling more environmentally focused stories. But it's been a long journey. I started with film, which is, which was amazing. And now I, of course, am a digital photographer, but I love using photography for communicating about conservation and now science. Yeah, so thank you.
Yes, right here.
Thank you. Hi. So, as a fellow Jersey girl and a recent bio graduate, Claire, you started in science. You got your PhD, but then you kind of sounds like you turned to storytelling and, showing science and scientists through images and words. How did that transition kind of feel? What were some of the challenges you faced, and are you able to find a balance between science and storytelling, or is it kind of one or the other?
Yeah, I found a press pass that had been issued to me from my middle school newspaper the other day. And it reminded me that I've been doing this storytelling thing since I was 12. It was like a Polaroid. But I was also, like the president of the Science and Environment Club. So in my entire life, I've been zigzagging. I think I changed my mom's watching, I'm sure. She knows I changed my major like 3 times in undergrad. I was like an English major, and then I was like a science major, and then I was like an environmental policy major, who knows. And it was because, people kept on trying to put me into these lanes, right? And I just wanted to change lanes constantly, kind of the way people drive on the Garden State Parkway. And, so I have forged my own career. I started in filmmaking at a college, and then I went and did science for, more than a decade. And then, during the pandemic, I actually shifted back to journal. I'm actually a journalist. I'm a full-time journalist now. I'm a climate change journalist. And it's kind of gone back to my roots. And, maybe I'll go back to science. I actually am, authoring a scientific paper right now, despite my staff job as a journalist. And all that is to say is that you don't need to be put in the box. And it can feel difficult, but to forge your own path, if it feels right to you, as long as you persevere, then you can make it work.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see in the back there, hand up.
Hello, I'm Julie. How are you? Thank you so much for your talk today. I thought your message of perseverance was very important, and I really like that you brought that tonight. Thank you for doing that. I own an organization that works in early childhood education, and I wanted to add something to this woman's comment in the back, and that is, I struggle with the same thing. It's trying to, provide equal access to anyone. All children deserve the science that you're trying to bring. I find that going around the school is the best. So parent, teacher organizations have way more sway than we think they do. And I would say that if you are in the room and you have children that go to school and you're interested in providing to people that are not just your own children, that's the way to do it. Parent teachers organizations are very powerful. That's all.
Yeah, thank you for that. We should do more of that.
Any more questions before we? Yes, here, right. Yeah.
Hi. So I think there's been a focus on early STEM education. Thank you. So you've spoken a lot about early STEM education. I'm curious, for those who didn't pursue STEM in undergrad, have you seen career pivots into science, and what is the general process for that for those that are interested?
Yeah, great question. So we actually very intentionally featured 2 women in the book who had big career pivots. One woman is Patricia Wright, who is an amazing conservationist who works in Madagascar. But we specifically chose her story because she worked as a social worker in her 20s and basically decided to, pursue studies of lemurs in her late 20s and had faced a lot of challenges making that transition, but made it through and is now arguably one of the most famous scientists working in Madagascar, external, foreign scientists working in Madagascar. So she's a great example. And then there's also Jean Beasley, who is basically, she was in her 80s when she's in her 80s, and she saw a sea turtle come up on the beach near her home and didn't really know what it was, and it ended up being injured. And she basically took it in and then had to figure out what to do with it. And she started a sea turtle rehabilitation center in her retirement. And so we wanted to highlight the fact that you don't have to know exactly what you want to do from the time, there are women in the book that were just collecting rocks on the beach at age 7, and they knew they wanted to be a geologist. But that is not the case for all of us, right? And so we definitely have examples, and there are so many other examples we know of as well. So, yeah.
I
think we have one more back here.
One more question. Yes. Oh, well, there's one there. Okay,
Hi.
2 more questions.
I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you met your 25 scientists. How did you find them?
I'll add a little, and then maybe you can add some too. Well, we really wanted to highlight, so one of the things we talked about early on was if we were in middle school, what were we anxious about in middle school? There were a lot of things I was anxious about in middle school. I'm kind of an anxious person. So, and so in any case, we tried to think about what would kids think about when they were thinking about being a scientist. And we knew that some kids thought that scientists are always alone, right? They work alone in a laboratory, they don't have friends. So we knew we wanted to find a woman who could talk about friendship and the importance of collaboration in science. We knew maybe some kids had anxiety about can I be a scientist and be a mom? And so one of Claire's friends was a great example, Sarah Stewart Johnson, who took her son on expedition in Iceland to study in the field. And so we really wanted to pick women who had these really specific stories. And so that meant that some of the women that we picked were our friends. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So if you read the book, these aren't the best scientists in the world living today. Each of them had a story that represented a different theme that we thought was important to communicate. And we started with our friends. Or then we would ask our friends who they knew. Some of them we had met through National Geographic. Sarah worked down the hall from me when I was teaching at Georgetown. Other women we had no idea about or had been written emails about, because again, I had done this photo project in North Carolina, so I'd gotten emails about that. So it was very organic and process, but we had a list of many more women. And we narrowed it down, 1, to women who wanted to talk, because the one thing I want to say is that women don't always want to speak up, which is fine. But I do feel there's an internalizing of women. Oh, someone else can. I'm not the expert, right? Someone else should do. Or men will elbow you out of the way if they have zero expertise to talk about something, which is my personal experience. Not generalizing, but my personal experience. And so not everyone wanted to talk. And and so it was really selecting women who wanted to talk, who had stories about tricky themes that we could boil down to, for an 8-year-old. And then the other thing is that we really wanted to have women from all over the world, because we are very America focused, and what we learned from our time in Zimbabwe is that there are things and challenges that women are facing in other cultures that we have very little knowledge about. And so we learned a lot from talking to women from other cultures too.
Okay, we'll take one more question from where? Oh, did you? Okay, you have somebody. Yeah.
Hi, Claire and Gabby. So I have a question. I guess most of the work that you're talking about tonight was post-doctoral work. So essentially my question is, I'm starting a doctorate at Oxford in the fall, which has to do, thank you, a lot with your projects. I'm exploring the gender politics of women in space. And part of my project is to make a documentary. So my question is I'm also a professional artist and have been working for a bit, and how to negotiate the ethics of transcribing your portraits and gathering the footage, whether it's in a doctoral sense or post, in the real world. Or how do you negotiate the ethics of what you show and the questions you ask and creating these portraits?
That's a great question. So I'll let Claire answer as well. So I was doing my PhD I started my PhD when we were doing the book, and you were finishing your PhD when we were doing the book. This didn't play a role directly in either of our research. So I think for me, I was very clear about the hat I was wearing when I was doing the interviews and the work. Because this isn't investigative journalism either, in a sense, we were very open with the women about what we were featuring, and we gave them multiple opportunities to review how we'd represented them in this case. Which you might not do, and you can speak to this more, but you might not do if you were writing for the Washington Post. But in this case, we wanted them to have that creative control over telling their own stories.
Yeah. We did this on the side because we're crazy. And, graduate school is a great time to explore your interests, because in one sense you have no time, and in the other sense you have all the time in the world. So, there's I think I'm going to fudge this, but Ira Glass, who's one of the greatest storytellers, she started This American Life. He said, start with where you are with what you have. And it was what we did with this film. I think we were unboxing a camera in the airport on the way to Zimbabwe, right? We're like, we'll read this instruction video or, instruction manual now. And this doesn't really answer your question, but it's a great time to experiment, whether in your doctoral degree or not, with these things. And how you separated it out is really up to you and your advisor. Probably a great conversation to have then. But another thing is to be really upfront about what you're doing and how, before you go into it, and forming those relationships with the women. We formed very good relationships with those women so they would trust us with their stories. And I think trust with stories is a great place to end on this, because these women trusted us with their stories. For many women, it was the first time they had ever shared their stories before, and we feel really grateful for that. We're up here talking, but it really wouldn't have been without these women, who shared their stories and were brave to do so. Then I want to give them a kind of a round of applause now too for sharing their stories with us. So thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Claire and Gabby, for such an engaging evening. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And we're going to shuttle them out into the hall so they can we can sell and sign some books for you, and you can chat with them out there. So thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for this.
That's awesome.